What's up, fight fans from around the world? You have tuned in to the War Room, and I'm here with my boxing experts because I'm just a fan. I'm here with Malissa Smith, women's boxing historian, and my boy Eddie, Mr. Eddie Goldman from No Holds Barred News. And we are going to have an exciting show today because we're talking about women's boxing. We're talking about Claressa Shields. We're talking about big shout out to Team Zepeda last night because he won against Vargas with that one. I don't know how many punches it was, but it was a first round knockout. And Julian Chua is his manager. And I know Julian from Wildcard. So I want to give a big shout out to Team Zepeda. Good job, team. So Melissa, let's get right into this women's boxing weekend. It was, I watched a bit amazing of that, right? I've watched a bit of that Nava fight. Oh my gosh.
Well, there were two big ones. There was on DAZN. I think we had talked about it last week. There was Chantelle Cameron, who had the WBC super lightweight title, fighting a unification bout with the American fighter out of Gary, Indiana, Mary McGee. She had the IBF's super lightweight title. And because Cameron was one and Mary McGee was number two, they also fought for the first Ring Magazine belt as part of their unification bout. So that was really awesome. McGee is the more experienced fighter in the sense that she was 27-3, I think, coming into that bout. But Cameron had a strong amateur background, so her 14-0 record sort of belied a very deep bench, if you will, in her boxing skills. And I got to tell you, that fight was something. They ended up being the main event, which was awesome too.
Now, why were they the main event? Because Dylan White
pulled out, with the alleged shoulder injury out of his fight with Otto Wallen.
Right.
And so they became the main event. I'm just going to add one little, before I really get into the fight, I just want to say that they were the main event. And, they were at the O2 in London. Normally it holds 20,000. It certainly did not have anywhere near that number of people in the seats. But the thing that kind of upset me was people left before the main event fight with Chantelle and Cameron and Mary McGee. And that meant that it was only maybe half the auditorium was filled, half the stadium. And I got to tell you, everybody who left that ring, missed the fight of the night by a lot, because those two women put on an incredible boxing exhibition with amazing skills, but more than that, with incredible heart, the heart and soul of true champions. Chantelle Cameron, I would have to say, had the better technical skills. She was lighter on her feet. She was using sort of more comfortable and facile with different levels of boxing. And she was able to use lateral movement much more effectively and ring generalship more effectively. That having been said, Mary McGee never stopped. And in fact, those two women never stopped. They went wall to wall for 10 rounds of boxing. And if the cards show that Chantelle had, she was 100-90 on one card. She was 99-91 on another and 99-92 on a third card. But it belies the amount of work and energy that Mary McGee put in. And if you looked at Chantelle Cameron's face at the end of those 10 rounds, you could see she was in a fight. She was all red, scratched, had bruises and everything else. So it really was women's boxing at a very high level. Again, Chantelle was more of the boxer and had better technical skills. And I think she just had the edge in terms of her own energy level. But what McGee lacked in that skill set, slight amount, she made up for in heart and never stopped. And when you would think she was going to stop, and when you thought she was tired, she just would come out in the beginning of the round and just go bum, 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 and keep going. And Chantelle could never sit back and rest. So that fight was pushed for 10 rounds. At the end of it, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add something on it. I felt Chantelle Cameron just really outclassed Mary McGee. I agree with you about the heart and that Mary McGee never stopped and never quit. But the technical level, these were two different levels. And since this was sort of an eliminator, for this unofficially for this tournament, I think Chantelle Cameron presents anybody in that division with a real challenge. I think she's had better training. We know all this stuff about Jamie Moore and the MTK gang and all these kind of people, but they know their boxing, and she's learned it very well. And one of the problems, if in general in women's boxing, is there's a much thinner talent pool than men's boxing. Just give a little example. If you look at the WBC rankings, when you look at men's boxing, they fill up every space that they have for it. When you look at women's boxing in a number of the weight classes, they only rank a handful of fighters because they're dealing with a much smaller talent pool in general. And because of that, and because of the problems we discussed that these networks generally don't like to show women's boxing, they're not investing in it, they're not promoting and marketing it the same way, it becomes harder for them to really build up and get these fights. It's also, of course, newer to the Olympics. The amateur circuit is much newer, so there's a lot less overall experience. There's a lot of talent there. So I was really impressed by Chantelle Cameron. The other thing I found interesting was that I don't get DAZN since they doubled the monthly price during the pandemic, which is totally non-competitive and preposterous, and wouldn't let you resubscribe for the grandfather you in. But they put up highlights to this fight on their own website, not on one of these pirate sites, or not somebody just sticking it on YouTube, which might be there, I don't know. But the networks for a lot of these fights are putting up on their own social media highlights, and in some cases the entire fight for people to see, because they're not getting the huge numbers of people subscribing. And so they're going for greater metrics than just the amount of actual viewers they have. They're counting social media views on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and all these, Snapchat and all these different things to get their sponsorship going. So you can see the highlights of this fight, and there was, other things on that card, but I think Cameron has to be, she bragged after the fight. They said, who do you want to fight from the winner of the next fight? She said, I don't care, I'm going to beat them all. I think she has to be considered probably a favorite to win the whole thing at this point.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, she really did outclass, and I mean, her amateur background again really showed through. And on that basis, I think she really does have a good shot. I mean, the next fight up is Callie Reese, who's fighting Chantelle Cameron, the Canadian fighter. Callie Reese is also, came up through the pros, not through the amateur ranks. She's fought some very big fights, and some of which she's lost, but she was always game as an opponent and gave it her best. Whether she can match the skill level of Cameron remains to be seen. Certainly, I've seen her fight with tremendous heart, but her skill level may, in fact, not reach that level. The same thing if Jessica Cameron takes it, I think it would be something similar, although Cameron is a very strong fighter, and she really has improved significantly in the last couple of years over her last couple of fights. But I think part of what they're thinking about for Cameron is if she gets the undisputed, is then having her fight Katie Taylor. So we'll at Katie coming up to super lightweight for that, or her coming down to lightweight from super lightweight. So we'll see how that all plays out in terms of that particular arc. But
Right.
Cameron, at this point, to me, also is the favorite to win the undisputed.
And one other thing, if you look at the Twitter trends, this fight, the Cameron McGhee fight was trending on Twitter in the UK. It was all over Twitter there. It was on a very busy Saturday with all kinds of different sports and events and stuff going on. It was not trending in the US. So
Because it wasn't shown in the US, was it?
no,
Well,
no,
it
it was on
was.
DAZN.
It was
but
shown on DAZN, but it wasn't really marketed.
It wasn't promoted.
It wasn't
Right.
promoted here. It was promoted on DAZN by DAZN. But
Wow.
in terms of, Mary McGee's promotion was kind of non-existent other than what DAZN was putting out.
I
It's
didn't
not as
see
if
any
her-
promotions on anything from
Yeah,
DAZN.
I did. And I saw a lot because there was stuff all over Instagram. There was stuff all over Twitter from DAZN. And, Lou DiBello, who's her promoter, also was putting out stuff for Mary McGee on Instagram. He had a whole bunch of stuff, but it wasn't really promoted as much. And the packets, the fight packets out of DAZN were really focused on Cameron and not on McGee's story. So that was the other part of the problem. She was, even though they were both champions coming into this fight, from the standpoint of the promotion on DAZN, she was the B side of the
Right,
record.
she's the
So they did
B-side.
not really put, even over the evening of fights, or the afternoon of fights here in the United States, when they would put up the sort of promos for the fight, it was always Chantelle Cameron. It was not Mary McGee. You barely saw her, or barely knew she was even going to be in the fight. So that was part of the problem in terms of the American market. And it's a real big issue because I think we've talked about this, the American promoters are just not there for it.
Right.
And they're
We
not
call that
really-
gringo TV.
Yeah, and it's for Britain. I mean, DAZN's out of Britain. Matchroom Boxing is Britain, so they're going to go for their own fighters. They're not going to do the work for an American fighter who they view as the B side.
Right.
So it'd be interesting
That
to
makes
see
sense.
for, the Callie Reese, Jessica Camera fight, because that will be on DAZN. But you got an American fighter and a Canadian fighter, not an American fighter, and not a British fighter in that particular fight. So we'll see what'll happen. That'll be on, I think it's November 19th. And it certainly will not be the main event. But the other big fight was, for Mexico, the biggest women's boxing bout you could ever have, which was Jacky Nava, who came into the fight 38-4-4, 41 years old, an extraordinary super bantamweight fighter, and Mariana Juarez, who came in, 55-11-3, also 41 years of age. This is a fight.
41. That is
They were
crazy.
both 41 years old. And if you can see this fight on YouTube, if you follow any of our Twitter feeds, you can, grab it.
It was a great
This
fight.
was the fight.
It was not on
That was a great
American
fight.
It was not on
Yeah.
American TV, and I
No.
searched all over the place. It was on Azteca 7 in Mexico, and it was also shown in Latin America. But TV Azteca Deportes on their Twitter feed, I don't know if it was just to the US or everywhere, posted the fight on their Twitter feed 2 rounds at a time, and they put the entire fight on their YouTube page. This
Good.
is official, not one of these dodgy things. TV Azteca Deportes, look them up on Twitter or YouTube and see it. And they had the hashtag Son Guerreras. And this fight also was trending, including both Jacky Nava and Barbie Juarez, were all trending on Twitter in Mexico, but not in the US, where no network was smart enough to show this fight. And again, it's another fight. I mean, I know Melissa's going to get into it, but don't just look at the scores, because yeah, it was a very clear-cut decision for Jacky Nava. This was a very, very competitive fight for all of the 10 rounds. And I think if they had 3-minute rounds and 12 3-minute rounds like the men, it would have been just as competitive. But it was an exciting fight to watch. And yeah, you could not believe either of these fighters were 41 years old unless you were
Right.
told that or just looked it up. I mean, they looked a decade less. So
Right.
very, to me, it was to me, it was the most enjoyable fight of the night. And I watched about 5 or 6 fights Saturday.
Yeah, I
Excellent
agree,
boxing. Mhm.
because the quality of both fighters was so exceptional. And they have different styles, slightly different styles. Mariana Juarez is more of a, come forward kind of fighter, really more classical Mexican style fighter, or what you think of as a Mexican fighter. They never stop, they're always going in one direction. But a lot of levels, a lot of really great execution, great defensive skills. Jacky Nava is sort of more in the Lomachenko kind of school, where constantly using lateral movement, a lot of different, she'll have right hand leads, left hand leads, come back with another right hand lead, a lot of levels. She went one round, which was basically all to the body. I mean, it was crazy watching her. And a lot of really quick, I'm not going to say shoe shine, because that doesn't really give justice to just how much zip was on those punches. But it had the speed of shoe shine, just bop, 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 like this, but with sharp, executed beautifully, and really stinging in terms of their effectiveness in the ring. And as Eddie
3 punch
said,
combinations,
3,
head,
4,
head,
5,
body.
head, body,
Yeah,
body,
that,
head.
that was classic. You see a lot of Mexican fighters do that. The left hook to the body. She used it
Mhm.
very effectively.
Very effectively. And then she, again, a lot of beautiful lateral movement. She'd go with a right hand lead, and then boom, she's somewhere else entirely, coming back
Excellent
with the left.
footwork. Excellent. That's
Just
all I kept saying.
beautiful.
Wow, her footwork is
we
amazing.
were all talking about, if you watched the Cameron McGhee fight, everybody was talking, or the announcers were all talking about Cameron's footwork, and it was beautiful. But compare that to Jacky Nava, and then you're just, again, in a whole other level.
Right. You see, there's
She was in
levels to this
Loma
shit.
land to me. I mean, she's like top 10 boxer anyway, but she'd give men a run for their money as a boxer. She's just a phenomenal boxer. You don't have to assign her a gender. You just say she's a boxer, an extraordinary boxer.
I feel like Don King. Viva Mexico! Viva
Exactly.
Mexico! Gotta
And
get the flags waving.
Yeah, and as Eddie said, the scores there too were kind of, you had 190, you had 97, 93, you had 99, 91. I mean, the scores were all over the place.
Wow.
You just didn't even want to score the rounds. You just want to say, yeah, okay, we're going to give it to Nava. And the scores didn't really make sense, and they don't tell the real story. You have to watch the fight, because Barbie Juarez, I mean, she's amazing too. She's an amazing fighter. She just Jacky Nava had something a little bit
Right.
higher
That little
up the scale.
edge. It's
That little edge.
Right.
She was beating her to the punch. She got her tired. I think it was
Stayed sharp.
Stayed sharp.
Right.
She never let down. At the end of the 10th round, you'd think it was
She
the
finished
third.
strong.
You'd think it was the third round.
Right.
I mean, she wasn't even breathing heavy. I think it was the end of the 7th or the 8th. I think it was the end of the 7th, the Belden ring. Barbie Juarez stopped. And it's like, Jacky Nava doesn't hear it. She's just going. Until finally the bell rang. It was like
That's
2
in
or
the
3
zone right
seconds
there.
late.
Yeah.
And the ref kind of steps in between. But Barbie had just stopped. And she's like, I don't hear the bell. Boom, boom. Just absolutely fantastic fight.
Wow. Great
One
job,
of the
ladies.
best fights I've seen in a long time.
And one of the things, if you look up the records of these two fighters, so they fought the vast majority of their fights in Mexico. They have fought a few times, mainly early in their career, a handful of times in the United States. And I don't know well enough the politics behind this, because they're with Zanfer Promotions, they're with the Azteca, which is one of the, not the biggest Mexican network, but it is absolutely absurd that the Los Gringos Locos who run American TV and streaming services did not put this fight on, and you had to wait for Azteca to put it up on YouTube, where obviously for free, legal, but for free, instead of being on some TV network, either subscription or get advertising in or whatever. They didn't even put it on Azteca America, which is really hard to find the affiliates of, but I finally dug it up. It's available over the air and on a number of cable systems around the United States. And they were showing some other stuff and infomercials and all kinds of crap. They didn't even show this fight on tape delay after it was over, which is utterly absurd. And I just think, again, shows there really the xenophobia, the racism, the white supremacy, the misogyny, all this. There happens to be another Mexican fighter that's all over American TV and international TV and the streaming services, a fellow by the name of Saul Canelo Alvarez. I think you've all heard of him. And he's getting this tremendous coverage, as are other fighters from Mexico. Now, you could say, okay, Jacky Nava and Barbie Juarez, they're 41, they're at the end of their career, but why weren't they featured over the years on American TV? I think we know the answers to that, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful. So for people that are real boxing fans, and boxing being an international sport, I encourage them, even though we've discussed the fight and discussed the results, watch this fight on the Azteca TV Azteca Deportes YouTube or Twitter, and you could see it, and you could see the announcers, whether were very, including the great Julio Cesar Chavez, were really exuberant during this fight. But I think in this case, they were pretty justified in being so.
I'm going to add in something else, which is that if you look at Jacky Nava's career fights, and if you look at Mariana Juarez, you will see a lot of American women, a lot of European women have gone to Mexico to fight them. And the reason is, and I know one case in particular, which was Alicia Ashley, the American fighter who went down to Mexico to fight Jacky Nava, because that was the only time she was going to get paid. Because she was getting $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for a fight in New York. But if she went to Mexico, she was getting $20,000 or $30,000.
Wow.
Okay, so yeah, not
That's
only
a huge disparity. Huge
to Eddie's
disparity.
point, not only is the American market stupid in the sense of not understanding what great fighters these women are and bringing them into the American market to help develop women's boxing as a viable sport, but Americans were going down there to box because they at least had a payday, because there was enough of a market in Mexico to sustain it
Right.
comfortably. So for these level of fighters, so it's annoying and angering on many different levels. So
Well, I think too, fighters like Canelo could easily demand, or he's a promoter now. He could be putting women on his fight cards. And
absolutely.
right.
Where are they?
Exactly. We have to encourage fighters who are at the top of their game to encourage more women to be on the undercard. You know what I mean? Because when I had a guy I was managing a guy who was a Golden Gloves, and he was always B-side, but he was fun to watch in the ring because he had a lot of heart, kind of like Deontay Wilder. He's not coachable. He just goes in there and does whatever he wants, but he had a lot of heart. And, a fighter would say, hey, the management team would say, hey, I want him to fight on my undercard. So why aren't other fighters doing that for women boxers? I think we have to encourage that in the industry.
Absolutely. And to your point, there's no women's boxing fight on the Alvarez card, Alvarez card.
Right.
So what is that about? It's not like there aren't great fighters. There are many great fighters all over the place.
Right.
So
I think it's a part of it is, misogyny. The other part is the money. They don't see how the women aren't filling the stadiums, the women aren't selling cards,
But they
blah, blah,
are.
blah. But they are.
Okay,
But, you know,
'cause-
that's the excuse they use. That's what I'm saying. That's just
I
the
mean,
excuse
but
they
I
use.
can tell you, you know, when Heather Hardy used to be on a card in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center, she would get $20,000 sold in tickets herself just for her. And she'd end up walking out at 6 o'clock when there are 4 fans in the stand. And she was the one that brought in the most money every time.
Wow.
So that's a bunch of
Right.
Right.
Bunch
Oh,
of
you
hooey.
know, we know.
And women's sports on TV, since all this is more of a TV and streaming sport now, is starting to explode. And if you look at the sports trade media, they're all starting to notice that. And I mentioned it in the article I did on Claressa Shields on my Patreon, linked to some things. The WNBA, for example, and I'm not a basketball fan, so I don't watch basketball, but their ratings have skyrocketed the last season, even though other ratings are flat or lower compared to 2019. 2020 being the pandemic year was, you could say, well, that was not a typical year. The women's football in Europe got a big streaming deal, I think, with DAZN and some others, and it's really expanding. Sponsorships are expanding all over the place, and you could look up all the details of that. And boxing really should be part of that. There's an audience there, and it's not being utilized. So you had the Showtime card last night from Vegas, which had some good fights. I saw the 2 main fights. No women's fight was on it. I don't know. I only saw the ESPN Plus, the main event that the Top Rank put on Twitter with the Zepeda first round knockout. I don't know if they had any women on that card.
They did
Probably
not,
not.
because I checked it
Right.
out. They absolutely did not. I mean, look, Top Rank has one fighter, Michaela Mayer. She's fighting November 5th. That's the only woman you're going to see on a Top Rank fight these days. I think they may have signed someone else, but I haven't seen them.
And that's
you
the
know,
same night as the Canelo fight, right?
and that's a big, that's also, a road to unification. Michaela Mayer is going to fight Hamadouche, the French fighter. I mean, these are junior lightweight fights. This is a championship bout, unification bout, on the road towards some kind of, the idea is to get to undisputed at a certain point, because Terry Harper's fighting as well. So that's where we're going with this, is undisputed. And there you have a unification bout that's going to be fought at a very high level on November 5th. It will be on Top Rank. It will be on ESPN. But that's about it. Listen, PFL, which is where Claressa Shields fought on their championship card, their main event was Kayla Harrison in her PFL Women's Lightweight World Championship. They didn't have, MMA doesn't have a problem getting a main event with women,
Right.
filling the stands. You didn't have people leaving the stadium before the Kayla Harrison event. So what the heck is this? Is it just boxing? I don't get it. I really don't get it, because in MMA, they're filling stands, they're main events, it's not an issue.
Right.
Yeah, and you had Kayla Harrison was an Olympic gold medalist in judo, well known, and is adapted to MMA. They had Claressa Shields, another 2-time Olympic gold medalist, on that card. They didn't do well in the TV ratings, which we can get into when we discuss Claressa Shields' fight. But they're doing that. The other organizations in MMA, including one championship that Chris is wearing the T-shirt, has been promoting a number of women's fights. They heavily promoted Angela Lee, who is an American who's fighting in there, and other fighters from Asia on their cards. Boxing is run by dinosaurs. The last Olympic sport to add a women's division was, you get one choice, boxing in 2012. Even wrestling had added women by 2004, and everybody else had added a women's division. by that time. And the slowest, HBO didn't put on women's boxing till the last show in their 45-year showing of
I
HBO
think the
boxing,
last, so.
the
Yeah, they did
last
too.
one. And Showtime, it said that they, I know Chris asked Steven Espinoza, Showtime, about it, but what are they waiting for? Why aren't they showing these fights? There's an audience for them if you promote them properly. Now, ESPN did a series on Claressa Shields. I didn't get ESPN Plus either, so I didn't see that. But they did this series about her story and all that, and they attempted to promote that. You could do this is not rocket science how they do this. And as I said, they're using social media a lot more. There are ways that could be done using the old fashioned ways of the conference calls, or they're now by Zoom, and press releases and press conferences and stories, and the newer ways on social media. There are ways of doing this, but they're generally not doing it for women's boxing. So this is, here we go again, and it hurts the sport. It not only hurts the women's fighters, but it hurts boxing overall. It's very typical short-sightedness. What else is new for boxing?
Well, Eddie, do you want to talk about the Shields fight and the article you wrote on Patreon?
Yeah, I encourage people to subscribe. Maybe I'll just read a little
Excerpt.
paragraph
Mhm.
from this. This is about the third round. About halfway through round 3, with the fight seemingly up for grabs, Shields swung and threw a wild right hand, completely missing Montez. Perhaps Shields at this point was frustrated that her top-level boxing skills were not that effective in this MMA fight. Without missing a beat, Montez immediately changed levels and shot for a takedown. Shields was unable to sprawl or shift her weight sufficiently to stuff the takedown, and down to the ground she went. Later in the round, still on the mat, Montez achieved full mount and wailed away on Shields, who had no answer for this attack. When the final bell sounded, Montez was in full control, obviously the winner of the round, and thus the fight. But it was only a split decision win for Montez, with one judge ridiculously scoring it in favor of Shields. Montez was a deserved winner of the fight, and Shields had suffered her first professional defeat in MMA and any combat sport. The key then was Shields' inability to move her hips and shift her weight like a wrestler or grappler would. Boxing and wrestling require different footwork and stances, with MMA often needing utilization of what works in wrestling. A marked deficiency in wrestling technique has done in many an MMA fighter. And then I mentioned how Shields knows all this and has been training at Jackson Wink MMA Academy, one of the most prestigious academies, but she's 26 and she's been boxing since 11, and she moves and thinks like a boxer. And now she's scheduled to return to the boxing ring on December 11th, just in a few weeks after months of training for MMA. And I would said about Shields, she is clearly not ready to compete in MMA on a professional level against anyone but the worst fighters, and training to do so could only set her boxing training and career back. And but she also said she's getting more money from these MMA fights than she ever did against lower level and unknown opponents than she ever did in the sport of boxing. So she's going to return to boxing. And then in 2023, she has another fight left on the PFL contract. So we'll see where this all leads. But it was not pretty to watch for Claressa Shields. And it was an extremely smart game plan by Abigail Montez, who before the fight said, I'm going to outbox her. She has holes in her boxing game for MMA. And then she proceeded to out wrestle her.
I knew that was bullshit when I heard it.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with Claressa Shields. Please, that's why I called it Claressa Shields and boxing need each other. Claressa Shields needs boxing, and boxing needs Claressa Shields.
Right on, Eddie. All right. What else we have to cover, folks? And Melissa, you have anything else?
No, just very quickly, Clarissa Shields will be fighting on December 11th on Sky Sports card. Savannah Marshall, she will be fighting early next year, will also be on the same card. But last night or yesterday on the DAZN fight card, and when they were talking about getting ready for the Cameron fight, it was announced that Katie Taylor will be fighting on a DAZN card on December 11th. So you're going to have Katie Taylor on DAZN, and you're going to have Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields in 2 separate fights on Sky Sports, same night. No discussion of who Katie Taylor is going to fight, but it may be a mandatory, not entirely sure yet. But all of her belts will be on the line. And as I understand it, Amanda Serrano may also be fighting sometime around, in the same time frame in December. And that, then poises them potentially for what they're now talking about, if you believe the media and all the blah, blah, blah from a lot of camps, may have some kind of fight to be put together in April. We'll see.
Right.
And right now, this December 11th doubleheader with the Shields fight and the Marshall fight, it's on Sky Sports box office on pay-per-view, and I guess the UK and Ireland, but there's no American TV listed. So again, that would be in the afternoon US time on that day. And there are a lot of other fights that are going on. Lomachenko is fighting against Richard Comey, I think, on the same day, and some other fights, but nothing is set. So I don't know if ESPN Plus is going to show it. I don't know if Showtime is going to show it. I don't know who's going to have a deal with Sky Sports Boxing now that they've resuscitated their boxing program, but it's certainly not clear at this point. And again, it's pretty disgraceful if that card is not an American TV, and we're going to have to go searching around social media and all this to try to see those fights. So
yeah, I agree, especially if Clarissa Shields is on that card, they lose a huge market opportunity if it's not really promoted well for the United States, so that her fans in the United States can watch that bout, even if it's the middle of the afternoon. Because let me tell you, because the DAZN card will be in the middle of the afternoon with Katie Taylor probably fighting 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. So we'll see what that's all going to look like, because usually the DAZN cards start around anywhere between noon and 2 p.m. Eastern time. But at least the main card usually starts at 2 p.m. Eastern time on the East Coast. So, and yeah, the end of the card. And I think Katie Taylor's fight would probably be right before the main event. So that would probably go around 4:30, 4:45 Eastern time. And Serrano and Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall, if it's a similar kind of time frame, you're going to be right at the same time. So hard to know.
Well, I'll have to watch one of those on demand. That's the beauty about DAZN, is you can just go back and watch it on demand. So that's the cool thing. Eddie, what else you have for us, brother?
I'll just quickly go over. There were a bunch of other fights this weekend. This one, if you see it, if you get Showtime, don't blink. Jaurez bouts Ennis with a first-round devastating knockout over the veteran Thomas Delorme. He handled him like other fighters have not handled Delorme. He was expected to win, but it was a very, very emphatic performance that went on. There was also the Cepeda Vargas fight, which, interestingly enough, Top Rank put a ringside view of that first round knockout for Cepeda up on Twitter. So if you don't get ESPN Plus or you haven't seen it, you can just look at their Twitter. And this is going on, by the way, during the Game 4 of the World Series, which again, another time took 4 hours, but that's been getting like 10 million plus viewers. So putting all this boxing on the same weekend is not the greatest thing for them. And in the main event, you had, I guess it was a bit of an upset where Rajab Butayev upset Jamal James. I don't know if it really should have been an upset because I always felt James was a guy who had been overrated. But after a couple of rounds of James, a very tall, skinny welterweight, just putting out his jab and trying to box, he got broken down by Butayev. And this was a 9th round TKO. And this also featured some of the worst officiating you're going to see in a long time, because during the fight, the referee docked Butayev a point. Celestino Ruiz docked him a point for holding very quickly. And it seemed that he was doing everything to help James. But then in the 9th round, the stoppage looked like it also might have been too fast. And a lot of people said it was a quick stoppage, and they declined to make anybody from the Nevada State Clown Commission or the referee available to discuss the stoppage or the point deduction on TV after the fight. And
Fight fixing, that's what that is, folks.
Then when you look at the scores after 8 rounds, it was very clear if you watch this fight, Butayev was way ahead in the fight, that James had won 2, maybe 3 if you're generous, but maybe just the first 2 rounds. So 2 of the judges had it 77-74 for Butayev, which meant he had won all but 2 rounds. One of the judges, Patricia Mortz-Jarman, had James leading after 8 rounds, which is utterly preposterous scoring again. So here we go. And I don't know if this is going to set up Ennis versus Butayev. Butayev really had only 1 loss in his career, a pretty clear-cut decision loss to Disputin a couple of years ago, but that was overturned because Disputin was tested positive for drugs. And the other things I'll just quickly say, we got the Canelo fight that's coming up next week, and also follow this Rolly Romero situation because there's a scandal involving him that several women have accused him of sexual assault. And
I believe that. I hate to say that, but I believe that after meeting.
Right, and he may be pulled from his Gervonta Davis pay-per-view in December. So as we record this, nothing has been said other than Espinoza of Showtime said he's very concerned and they're watching it. And media reports say they're looking for a new opponent, but nothing officially has been announced. But I think he's going to be out of that fight.
Why are they looking for a new opponent when they know shit like this happens all the time? There should be a backup order automatically. They should have somebody ready to step in automatically. Waiting around. All right, folks, look, we got to wrap this up.
It's difficult.
Oh, that well.
You know, a pay-per-view against Tank Davis, you just don't want to throw anybody in there. So we'll see what they do.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we got to wrap this up, my beautiful people. It's been a fantastic weekend. Melissa, tell the people where they can find you.
Hi, folks. You can get me on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at girlboxingnow, or come to my website at girlboxing.org.
Right on. Eddie, Mr. Goldman.
You can get me on Twitter at NHB News and subscribe to my Patreon page because you're going to have analysis that's not filtered by these networks and promoters and managers and organized crime figures. And that's at patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. And I'm in New York and I'm virtually dressing up for Halloween this year, I guess, is a Vulcan. So live long and prosper.
You look good as a Vulcan there, Eddie.
Thank you.
All right. So look, folks, if you want to get in-depth coverage on, we cover corruption in boxing and just sports governance in general, then you have tuned into the right channel. You guys need to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and hit that notification bell so that you know every time we post up a video. You want to check out our old videos, you go to us on YouTube or WAARsports.com. That's WAR with a double A, WAAR. Sports. I almost forgot how to spell there, folks. It's a Sunday morning. And look, I'll see you guys next time. I am the Fight Goddess. Peace.